The phone slipped from my trembling fingers, clattering against the cold floor as the words continued to echo in my ears, sharp and unreal. Your son has been in a serious accident. Please come to the hospital immediately. And for a moment I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't even move because my entire world, my 10-year-old son Ion, my reason for waking up every day, my laughter, my light, was suddenly hanging somewhere between life and death, and it felt as though someone had ripped the ground from beneath my feet, leaving me suspended in a nightmare I couldn't escape, my chest tightening painfully as panic took over every inch of my body, and I remember whispering, "No, no, this can't be happening," over and over like it might undo reality itself, but nothing changed, nothing softened, and within seconds I found myself grabbing my keys with shaking hands. Barely aware of how I made it out the door, my mind replaying Ion's smile, his tiny hands holding mine that morning. The way he had laughed when I told him to hurry up for school, and the thought that those might be my last memories of him nearly broke me right there in the hallway, but I forced myself forward because I had no choice. Because a mother doesn't stop, doesn't fall apart, not when her child needs her, and the drive to the hospital became a blur of red lights I ignored, horns blaring around me, tears streaming down my face so heavily I could barely see the road, my lips moving in silent prayers. I wasn't even sure of who I was begging anymore. Please, take anything else, just not him, not my child, my voice cracking with every word as fear clawed deeper into my chest. And every second felt like an eternity stretching into something unbearable, my heart racing so violently it felt like it might give out before I even reached him. And when I finally pulled into the hospital parking lot, I didn't even park properly, just abandoned the car half crooked and ran, my legs weak but moving faster than they ever had before, the cold sterile air of the hospital hitting my face as I pushed through the entrance, the smell of antiseptic making everything feel even more suffocating, more real, more terrifying. And I rushed to the reception desk, my voice breaking as I gasped, "Emergency, my son, accident." Ion Khan, barely able to form complete sentences, and the receptionist looked at me with practiced calm, as if this was just another day, another crisis, another mother on the verge of breaking. And she pointed down a long white corridor, her voice distant as she said, "ICU, straight ahead," and I didn't wait for anything else, I just ran, my footsteps echoing loudly against the polished floor, my breath uneven, my vision blurred by tears and fear, my mind filled with horrifying images I couldn't control, Ion lying unconscious, bleeding, calling for me, alone, and I shook my head as if I could physically push those thoughts away, whispering, "He's okay, he has to be okay," but my voice held no certainty, only desperation, and just as I turned the corner toward the ICU, ready to burst through the doors and see him no matter what state he was in, a sudden force stopped me, a hand gripping my arm tightly, pulling me back, and I gasped, startled, my heart leaping into my throat as I turned to see a nurse standing there, her face pale, her eyes wide in a way that didn't match the calm environment around us, and for a second I thought she was going to tell me something terrible, something final, something that would shatter me completely, but instead she leaned closer, her grip tightening just slightly as if she needed me to understand, really understand. And in a voice so low it was almost lost beneath the hum of the hospital lights, she whispered, "Run, it's a trap," and my entire body froze, the words not making sense at first, my mind too overwhelmed with fear for my son to process anything else. "What?" I whispered back, my voice barely there, my heart pounding even harder now but for a different reason, confusion mixing with dread in a way that made my stomach twist painfully, but the nurse didn't repeat herself, didn't explain, didn't even look at me again as she suddenly let go of my arm and walked away quickly, disappearing down the corridor as if nothing had happened. As if she hadn't just dropped a warning that made my entire reality tilt sideways, and I stood there for a moment, completely still, my breath shallow, my thoughts racing, her words echoing again and again in my mind, "It's a trap, it's a trap, it's a trap," and a cold chill spread through me despite the bright lights and busy hospital around me, because something about the way she said it, the fear in her eyes, the urgency in her voice, felt real, too real to ignore. And yet how could this be a trap when my son was inside, hurt, waiting for me, needing me, and I felt torn in two directions, one part of me screaming to run, to listen, to escape whatever danger she was warning me about, and the other part, the stronger part, the part that was a mother above all else, refusing to leave without seeing Ion, no matter what. no matter the risk, and slowly, hesitantly, I turned back toward the ICU doors, my heart now beating with a mixture of fear and suspicion, my steps slower, heavier, each one filled with uncertainty as the weight of that single whisper pressed down on me, and deep inside, beneath all the panic and desperation, a quiet but undeniable realization began to form. Something wasn't right, something was very, very wrong, and as I reached for the door handle with trembling fingers, I knew with a certainty that chilled me to my core that this was no ordinary accident, that whatever waited for me on the other side of that door would change everything I thought I knew, and for the first time since the call, my fear wasn't just for my son's life, but for something far more dangerous, far more deliberate, something that had been set in motion long before I ever picked up that phone. I forced my trembling hand to push the ICU door open, every instinct inside me screaming to stop, to turn back, to run like the nurse had warned, but my heart overpowered everything else because my son was inside and nothing, not fear, not doubt, not even danger, could keep me away from him, and as the door creaked softly, the sterile smell of the room hit me first, followed by an eerie silence that felt completely wrong for a place meant to save lives, my eyes scanning desperately for machines, doctors, anything that would explain the urgency of the call, but instead what I saw made my entire body go still. Ion was sitting upright on the hospital bed, completely unharmed, no bandages, no bruises, no signs of pain, just sitting there with wide, confused eyes as if he didn't understand why I looked like I had just survived a nightmare. "Amy," he said softly, his voice breaking through the chaos in my mind. And within seconds I rushed to him, collapsing beside the bed, my hands cupping his face, checking his arms, his shoulders, his head, searching desperately for any hidden injury I might have missed. "You're okay, you're okay," I kept whispering as tears streamed uncontrollably down my face, relief crashing into me so powerfully it almost made me dizzy. But even in that moment something felt off, something didn't sit right in my chest, because the room was too quiet, too empty. And slowly my eyes began to notice what my panic had hidden at first. There were no monitors attached to him, no 4 lines, no medical staff rushing in and out, no urgency, just stillness, a heavy unnatural stillness that made the nurse's warning echo louder in my head. "It's a trap." And my heart began to race again, this time not from fear of losing my son, but from a growing sense of something far more dangerous, something planned, something deliberate. And before I could even gather my thoughts, a slow, deliberate sound broke the silence, clapping, steady and mocking, coming from behind me, and my entire body stiffened as I turned slowly, already dreading what I might see, and there he was standing in the doorway as if he had been waiting for this exact moment. Samir, my husband, the man I had trusted with my life, leaning casually against the frame with a smile that sent a chill down my spine because it wasn't the smile I knew. It wasn't warm or comforting or familiar. It was cold, sharp, almost amused, like he was watching a performance and enjoying every second of it. "Impressive, isn't it?" he said, his voice calm, almost playful, and my mind struggled to catch up with reality. "Samir, what is this?" I asked, my voice shaking as I stood up slowly, instinctively placing myself between him and Ion, my heart pounding as confusion turned into something darker, something heavier. And he pushed himself off the doorframe and walked into the room with an unsettling calmness, his hands slipping into his pockets as if none of this was serious. As if he hadn't just put me through the most terrifying moment of my life. "Relax," he said with a small smirk, "it's just a test," and his words hit me like a slap. A test, the word echoed in my mind, twisting my confusion into disbelief. "A test?" I repeated, my voice rising despite myself. "You lied about our son being in an accident, you made me think he was dying, and you call this a test." But instead of any guilt, any regret, he simply rolled his eyes, his expression turning dismissive. "Don't act like you're innocent," he said, his tone suddenly sharper, colder, and I felt the ground shift beneath me again. "What are you talking about?" I asked, my voice quieter now but filled with a growing unease, because something in his eyes told me this wasn't just cruelty, it was accusation, calculated and intentional, and he let out a small laugh, shaking his head as if I had just confirmed something for him. "I know everything," he said, each word slow and deliberate, "about the money, about the property, about how you've been hiding things from me." And my breath caught in my throat as a wave of shock washed over me, not because of what he said, but because of how wrong he was and yet how confident he sounded. And in that moment I realized this wasn't just about testing me, this was about something much deeper, Something he had convinced himself was true, something dangerous. Samir, I don't know what you think you know, but this is insane, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, trying to make sense of the man standing in front of me who suddenly felt like a stranger, but he only smirked again, that same cold, unsettling expression returning to his face. Oh, I know enough, he replied, his eyes locking onto mine with a sharp intensity that made my stomach twist, and I needed to see it for myself, how far you'd go, how much you'd panic, how much you really care, and I felt something inside me crack, not from fear this time, but from the realization that the man I loved had orchestrated this entire situation, had used our son as bait, had played with my emotions like they meant nothing, and the weight of that betrayal settled heavily in my chest, making it hard to breathe, because this wasn't just a misunderstanding or a mistake, this was calculated, planned, and executed without a second thought for the pain it would cause. And as I stood there, trying to process everything, trying to protect Ion, who was now watching silently with confusion and fear in his eyes, one thought became painfully clear. The warning I had been given wasn't about the hospital, it wasn't about some external danger waiting in the shadows, it was about this moment, about this man, about the truth I was now facing, that the real trap wasn't the place I had run to in desperation, but the life I had been living, the trust one had given, and the person I thought I knew. And as that realization settled in, heavy and undeniable, I knew that whatever came next, nothing would ever be the same again. I stood there for a moment, my body tense, my mind racing as I tried to process the weight of everything that had just unfolded, the image of Samir standing so casually in front of me, as if he hadn't just orchestrated the most terrifying moment of my life, burning itself into my thoughts, and slowly I moved closer to Ion, placing a protective hand on his shoulder as I faced Samir again, my voice quieter now but steadier. What exactly do you think you know? I asked, because beneath the shock and anger, there was something else rising inside me, something sharper, more focused, and Samir let out a short laugh, shaking his head like I was still playing a role he had already seen through. You really want to do this, he said, his tone almost amused, and before I could respond, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a thick file, tossing it carelessly onto the bed in front of Ion, the papers sliding slightly as they landed. I've already done everything, he added, his voice filled with quiet confidence, and my stomach tightened as I stared at the file, a terrible feeling creeping in. What is this? I asked, though part of me already knew the answer, and he crossed his arms, watching me with a smirk that made my skin crawl. Go ahead, open it, he said, and with trembling fingers I picked up the file, my heart pounding louder with every second as I flipped it open, my eyes scanning the documents until they landed on the signatures at the bottom, my signature, perfectly written, unmistakable, and yet completely fake, and for a moment the world seemed to tilt again. You forged this? I whispered, my voice barely audible as I looked up at him, disbelief and anger colliding inside me, but he simply shrugged like it was nothing, like he had just signed a receipt instead of committing a crime. You left me no choice, he said coldly, his eyes hardening. You've been hiding everything from me, acting like that property belongs only to you, and I felt a surge of anger rise in my chest, stronger than the fear that had consumed me earlier, because this wasn't just manipulation anymore, this was betrayal, calculated and deliberate. That property was left to me by my father, I said, my voice firm despite the tremor in my hands, and it was meant for Ion's future, not yours to take. And at the mention of our son, Samir's expression darkened, his jaw tightening as something almost possessive flickered in his eyes. I am his father, he snapped, his voice louder now, sharper. Everything that belongs to him belongs to me too, and Ion flinched slightly at the sudden change in tone, his small hand gripping mine tighter, and that single movement broke something inside me completely, not into weakness, but into clarity. Because in that moment I saw the truth without any illusions. Samir wasn't just angry or insecure, he was willing to use anyone, even his own child, to get what he wanted. And that realization settled into my chest like ice, cold and unshakable. You used him, I said slowly, each word deliberate, my eyes locked onto his. You made me believe he was dying just so you could confront me about money. And for a split second there was silence, but instead of denying it, instead of showing even a hint of guilt, Samir simply exhaled and looked away. As if it wasn't worth explaining, desperate times, he muttered, almost dismissively, and that was it, no apology, no regret, just justification. And I felt my grip on Ion's hand tighten as anger replaced the last remnants of shock inside me, because this wasn't the man I had married, or maybe it was and I had just never seen it clearly before. The late nights, the secret phone calls, the unexplained absences, all the small pieces I had ignored or excused suddenly came together into a picture I could no longer deny, and my heart ached not just for myself, but for the years I had trusted him blindly, for the life I had built on something that now felt like a lie. But even as that pain settled in, another thought rose quietly beneath it, steady and certain, he thought. He had already won. He thought this file, these forged papers, this cruel trap had secured everything for him, and that confidence was exactly what would destroy him, because what he didn't know, what he couldn't even imagine, was that I had started noticing the cracks long before today, that I had questioned the missing documents, the sudden interest he had shown in my father's property, the way his tone changed whenever money was mentioned, and instead of confronting him blindly, I had chosen to wait, to watch, to understand what he was really planning, and in doing so I had prepared myself in ways he hadn't anticipated, but I didn't reveal any of that yet, not here, not in front of him while he still believed he was in control, because sometimes the most powerful move isn't immediate confrontation, it's patience, it's letting the other person expose themselves completely. And as I looked at Samir standing there with that same cold confidence, I realized that moment had already arrived. He had shown me everything I needed to see, not just his actions, but his true nature, and as much as it hurt, as much as it shattered something deep inside me, it also gave me something else, something stronger than fear or betrayal. It gave me resolve, because this wasn't just about money or property anymore, it was about protecting my son, about ensuring that the person who had just proven himself capable of such manipulation would never have the power to hurt us again. And as that thought settled firmly in my mind, I straightened slightly, my expression changing in a way he didn't immediately notice, because for the first time since this nightmare began, I wasn't reacting anymore, I was thinking, planning, and quietly preparing for what would come next, and deep down I knew that whatever he believed he had taken from me today, I was about to take something far more important from him in return. Samir stood there with that same cold confidence, his arms crossed and his eyes fixed on me as if he had already won. As if the forged documents in my hand were the final move in a game he had been secretly playing for far too long, and for a moment I let the silence stretch between us, not out of hesitation but out of control, because this time I wasn't reacting with panic or confusion, I was choosing every breath, every glance, every word, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, a faint smile touched my lips, a calmness settling over me that he clearly didn't expect, and I saw it instantly, the flicker of uncertainty in his expression. "What?" he asked, his voice losing just a hint of its earlier certainty, and I closed the file gently, placing it back on the bed beside Ayan as if it no longer held any power over me. "You really thought I wouldn't notice?" I said softly, my tone steady, controlled, and his brows furrowed, confusion replacing confidence for the first time. "Notice what?" he demanded, his posture straightening as if trying to regain control of the situation, and I took a slow step forward, my eyes never leaving his. "The missing documents, the way you suddenly started asking about the property, the late-night calls you thought I didn't hear," I said, each word landing with quiet precision, and his jaw tightened, a flicker of irritation crossing his face. "You're bluffing," he said quickly, but there was a crack now, small but undeniable, and I shook my head slightly. "No, Samir," I replied, my voice calm but firm, "I've been watching you." And those words hung in the air like a shift in power, because they carried a truth he hadn't prepared for, and for a second he said nothing, his eyes searching mine as if trying to find weakness, doubt, anything he could use. But there was none left, only clarity, only resolve. And before he could speak again, the ICU door opened behind him with a quiet but decisive sound, and he turned sharply, irritation flashing across his face, but what he saw next froze him completely. The same nurse who had stopped me earlier stepped into the room, her expression no longer fearful but composed, and behind her were 2 police officers, their presence instantly changing the atmosphere from tense to final, and Samir's face drained of color. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice rising slightly as he looked from them to me, disbelief creeping in, and the nurse stepped forward, her gaze steady as she nodded toward me. "She reported everything," she said clearly, and I watched as the realization hit him, slow at first and then all at once, his confidence collapsing under the weight of what he now understood. You set me up," he said, his voice no longer steady, and I shook my head, taking another step closer, my eyes locked onto his. "No," I said quietly, "you set yourself up," and the officer moved forward then, his voice firm and official as he addressed Samir. Samir Khan, you are under arrest for fraud, forgery, and attempted financial exploitation. And for the first time since I had known him, Samir looked truly afraid, his mouth opening as if to argue, to deny, to regain control, but no words came out, because deep down he knew there was nothing left to say. The evidence, the forged signatures, the trap he had built, all of it had turned against him, and as the officers took hold of him, guiding him toward the door, he kept looking back at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of anger, disbelief, and something else, something closer to desperation. But I didn't look away, not this time, not ever again, because the hold he once had over me, the trust, the fear, the hesitation, it was all gone, replaced by something stronger, something unshakable. And as the door closed behind him, the room fell silent once more, but this time it wasn't heavy or suffocating, it was calm, almost peaceful, and I let out a slow breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding, my body finally releasing the tension it had carried since that first phone call. And when I turned back to Ayan, he was watching me with wide eyes, confusion still lingering but no longer overshadowed by fear, and I moved to him immediately, kneeling beside the bed and taking his small hand in mine. Holding it gently but firmly. It's okay, I whispered, brushing his hair back softly. Everything is going to be okay. And this time the words felt real, solid, not just something I was saying to comfort him but something I truly believed. Because the danger we hadn't even fully understood before was now gone, exposed and removed, and as I sat there beside my son, feeling the warmth of his hand in mine, I realized that revenge hadn't come in the form of anger or destruction. It hadn't been loud or dramatic. It had been quiet, patient, and precise. It had been about protecting what mattered most, about ensuring that the person who had tried to break us would never have that power again, and in that moment I understood that the sweetest revenge wasn't just watching someone fall. It was rising above everything they tried to do to you, stronger, wiser, and unbreakable, and as I held Ayan close, a sense of peace settled deep within me, because despite everything that had happened, despite the betrayal, the fear, the pain, we were still here, still together. And that was something no one could ever take away again.